A diagnosis of the disease, pages 197 to 217. Even the most superficial observer could see in the 18th century that the Muslim community had lost its grip on the subcontinent. The Maratha raids, whenever they occurred, demonstrated in a most painful manner to the average Muslim that his property, his life, and even his honor were no longer safe. Even around Delhi, the seat of the Muslim power, the Sikh and Jat depredations made life hazardous and unsafe. Then, with the characteristic short-sightedness of the Muslim nobility of this period, Safdar Jung sought the help of the Jats in the revolt against the Emperor Ahmad Shah and brought them into the suburbs of Delhi. The large Muslim population outside Shah Jahanabad, in the area called Old Delhi in those days, suffered terribly. Rape, murder, arson and plunder were its fate. Many sought safety in suicide. The Sikhs swarmed into Sarhind and Saharanpur and inflicted the same hardships upon the Muslims of that area. These were challenges to the very existence of the community, yet its selfish elements did not desist from their activities. The common people felt bewildered. The safety of the community had formerly been secured through a sturdy defense which could be sustained only by drawing continuously upon a reservoir of moral stamina. It collapsed when the inner strength had been frittered away. The roofs and walls of the edifice were falling, burying under the debris much of great value, but the fault lay in the foundation which had given way. However, such occasions do sometimes produce analytical thinkers who try to diagnose the disease which overtakes the people. The plight of this community produced Shah Waliullah. He was born in 1703. His father, Abdul Rahim, a scholar and a Sufi of renown in his own right, who preferred to lead a life of retirement and, in spite of unrivaled opportunities for being associated with the government of such an orthodox monarch as Alamgir I, refrained from availing himself of them. He did, however, cooperate with the emperor in the compilation of the well-known Al-Fatawa al-Alamgiriya. He was the founder of a college, Madrasa-e-Rahmaniya, where he himself lectured. Since he was both theologian and Sufi, his effort was to remove the conflict between theology and mysticism. This spirit of compromise he bequeathed to his son, Shah Waliullah, who received his early education, both theological and mystical, under him. After having been engaged in teaching for 12 years in his father's college, he left for Arabia to further his studies and to perform the pilgrimage. He studied at Medina for about 14 months. Here he was greatly influenced by Sheikh Abu Tahir bin Ibrahim, who was a competent and careful scholar. He was capable of taking broad views of problems and tried to remove conflicts and differing views wherever this could be achieved. He returned to Delhi on 9th July 1732. The anxiety about the future of the Muslim community in the subcontinent had impressed itself so deeply upon Shah Waliullah's mind that while at Medina he was convinced through a mystic experience that it was his duty and destiny to save it. However, his keen intellect must soon have realized that he was confronted with the most complex problem. The decline of the empire was a result of the decay of the social order. This in turn was the result of the moral collapse of the society, which could not disentangle itself from selfish short-sightedness. He felt that the first need was to restore the community's sense of unity, which had been shattered as a result of so many conflicts within its bosom. Religious differences, however, were not the only cause of loosening the bonds that had held the community together. There had crept into society economic and social factors that were working in the same direction. There were differences in the standards of living among the various classes of society even then, but authorities saw to it that the minimum was assured to everyone. In the remoter areas and settlements, the community feeling was strong enough to take care of the helpless and the poor. The large sums of money spent by official and private charity were intended to serve the same purpose. The mainstay of the community, however, can never be charity. The economic position of the Muslims was assured by the opportunities they had in the services of the state and in professions patronized by the government and the rich. Anarchy through the economic organization built up in the course of the centuries into chaos and disorder. It bred parasites who fleeced the people and gave them nothing in return. Add to the malady the discipline of organized government having disappeared, the nobles established their petty tyrannies over the areas that remained under their control. The Muslim peasant and craftsman suffered as much as his Hindu counterpart, but when the oppressor and the oppressed both happened to be Muslims, it broke the bonds of unity binding the Muslim community. The days were gone when small communities spread over a vast area arose as one man when challenged by an external danger. One no longer reads of organized resistance by Muslim settlements against the Jats, the Sikhs, or the Marathas. The Muslims had not only lost their leaders, they had lost their integration. From a well-integrated community, they had degenerated into a helpless crowd. If this disastrous course of events was to be stopped, it could not be done without the creation of sound and devoted leadership at Delhi. Shah Waliullah thought of this city for two reasons. Delhi was still looked upon as the principal city of Muslim India, and, it being the center of his own activities, he could exercise influence more directly there. He therefore tried to arouse the emperor from his lethargy, but he failed. Then he appealed to the nobility, who are incapable of listening to his sound advice. Then in his despair he turned to Nizamul Mulk Asaf Jah, because he seemed to be the only one among the senior Mughal nobles who was imbued with right ideals and had sufficient strength of character to rise above the surrounding corruption and short-sightedness. But this veteran administrator withdrew to the Deccan. Shah Waliullah's pathetic appeal to him produced little effect, probably because, as an experienced statesman and administrator, he knew better than the scholarly philosopher that the court of Delhi was past reform and therefore he should try to save at least the Deccan. The only element in the politics of North India that could inspire some hope was the Rohillas. They had for centuries found employment under Muslim sovereigns of the subcontinent and had even wrested power from the Turks to establish their own empire. Their good points were that they were brave fighters and had not lost their vigor and simple habits. They had not yet become tainted with the corruption of Delhi. They were staunch Muslims, and class distinctions had still not corroded their society. These qualities seemed to mark them out as the future leaders of Indian Islam. It is therefore not surprising that Shah Waliullah should have thought of using them for the resurgence of Muslim political power at Delhi. The Rohillas, however, had serious shortcomings which barred their way to leadership. They were not numerous enough to deal with such a formidable task, and the resources were not adequate. They had brought with them traditions of too much independence, which prevented united action even in a crisis. They were extremely intolerant of sectarian differences. Even minor deviations from their conception of orthodoxy were looked upon by them as heresy. This was a serious matter in an area where sectarian differences had played such havoc. It bred traditions of hostility with the new Shia state of Oudh, which ultimately resulted in the destruction of their political power. Shah Waliullah could not have been unaware of these deficiencies. The Rohillas' sectarianism ran counter to his endeavor to bring about some understanding among the different sects. Yet he had no choice. The Rohillas were the only possibility in that situation, and the deliverance of Muslims from the tyranny of marauders could brook no delay. There was yet another reason why Shah Waliullah's mind turned towards the Rohillas. It had now become obvious that it was futile to think of strengthening the Mughal Empire without some help from outside. The only Muslim power in a position to give some help was the new state founded by Ahmad Shah Abdali in Afghanistan. Shah Waliullah could hope for cooperation between Ahmad Shah Abdali and the Rohillas. They had made a success of their administration and, by affording protection to the Hindu peasantry and traders, had brought prosperity to their territories. It was not beyond hope that they might mature and adopt a conciliatory attitude towards the other sects of Islam. The Rohilla chief through whom Shah Waliullah sought to implement his short-term mission of curbing the forces of anarchy was Najib-ud-Dawla. He had already come under the influence of Shah Waliullah, for whom he had great respect and with whom he kept up intimate correspondence and whose advice he invariably accepted. Shah Waliullah's hope that Najib would prove to be a conscientious Muslim and make every effort to gain respite to the Muslims from the depredations to which they had been subjected by the Marathas, the Jats and the Sikhs, and would cooperate with Ahmad Shah Abdali, found justification in the actions of Najib, who has won praise from Muslim as well as non-Muslim authorities for his statesmanship and far-sighted policies. Shah Waliullah also corresponded with Ahmad Shah Abdali, to whom he related the suffering of the Muslims and pointed out his duties as a Muslim monarch to strive to save them from the clutches of their tormentors. Ultimately, Najib-ud-Dawla was able to organize an alliance of the Muslim powers of northern India against the Marathas under the leadership of the capable Afghan monarch, which resulted in the great victory of Panipat in 1761, where the Marathas were crushed to an extent that they took long to recover their strength. The triumph of Muslim arms at Panipat was the culmination of Shah Waliullah's political efforts so far as his short-term program was concerned, because he died in the following year. If Ahmad Shah Abdali had not shown consideration for the old Mughal dynasty which led to his abandonment of India, perhaps the history of the subcontinent might have taken a different course for some time. All hope was lost after his withdrawal, and the Mughal court sank deeper and deeper into the mire of its sloth and inefficiency. Shah Waliullah's political efforts succeeded in winning only a short-lived respite for the Muslims from the rapacity of the anarchic elements. It is, however, in thinking of the basic causes of the decline of the Muslims and trying to find remedies for those evils that the real greatness of Shah Waliullah lies. It is his thought which has found for him an enduring niche in the history of Islam. Shah Waliullah thought that the fundamental cause of the moral decline of the Muslims of the subcontinent was their ignorance of Islam itself. The basic teachings of Islam are contained in the Quran, the authority of which has been recognized by all Muslims. An emphasis upon the teachings of the Quran would, therefore, tend to reduce sectarian differences and create feelings of solidarity, because the differences are mostly a matter of interpretation. Hence, it was necessary to popularize the Quran itself. Not many knew Arabic sufficiently well to understand the Quran. The average Muslim derived his knowledge of Islam from the teachings of the jurists, theologians, and Sufis. However valuable these might be, they could not replace direct knowledge of the Quran itself. Shah Waliullah, therefore, translated it into Persian, a language which was then widely understood by the educated classes and even today has such a strong affinity with Urdu. This was a bold step because before this no handy translation had existed in Persian. Shah Waliullah produced a translation and introduced the fashion of interlinear composition of the Arabic text and the translation. As Muslims did read the Quran in Arabic, even though they did not understand the meaning, such an arrangement would gradually give the constant reader some understanding of the Arabic text as well. If it is remembered that some Muslim peoples resisted the translation of the Quran into any language right up to the 20th century, it would become clear that Shah Waliullah had taken a revolutionary step. It was therefore not surprising that it was opposed in some circles at that time, But so great was his reputation that the translation succeeded and was later followed by translations into Urdu. In another work, Shah Waliullah formulated the principles of the interpretation of the Quran. Shah Waliullah was very anxious that the minor differences among the Muslims should come to be seen in their proper perspective. He therefore took up these one by one and tried to bring about some understanding of the different points of view. The Orthodox Sunni community follows 4 schools of interpretations, all considered to be authentic. Yet there grew up intolerance of interpretations that belong to a different school. Shah Waliullah sought to soften these differences by explaining the functions of interpretation. In fact, in Islamic parlance, interpretation is called ijtihad, which has a wider connotation because, in the words of Shah Waliullah, it is an exhaustive endeavor to understand the basic principles of the holy law and not confined to an effort to understand the conclusions of the earliest scholars. Hence, it may result in disagreement with the rulings of the earlier jurists and theologians, however eminent they may be. A person who has the necessary qualifications and competence can probe into the law and theology, and it is a mistake to argue that such men do not exist now. He then discussed the causes that led to the differences in ijtihad and reached the conclusion that often the truth lies between 2 extreme views. Hence, it is ridiculous to be stubborn and to deny whatever the opponent has to say, because there is room in Islam for such differences.